right, welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. Um, First thing I think we'd like to discuss, because it's fresh in all our minds, is yet another Biden failure, this time overseas. Went to Saudi Arabia, did the fist pump after calling the Saudi leadership pariahs and the country overall as a pariah state. And then in Israel, being just making a fool of himself, being led to, where to sit down. So your assessment, am I correct in saying yet another failure, an embarrassment?
Well, I mean, it depends on how you look at it and what your expectations are. In terms of any other president, yes, this would be an abject failure. But as I said on this podcast several weeks ago, we were going to be lucky if he got through this without shitting his pants. And he didn't shit his pants. So for the Biden administration, this is a huge success.
You are probably correct. I think that he probably got some vinegar in his step. He's doing a climate, it was going to be a climate emergency address. Now it's just a address on, climate change. So I think I agree with you. For anyone else, he got absolutely nothing, accomplished nothing. But again, with him, you're setting the bar, he did not shit himself.
Exactly.
It was a high five, an amazing performance.
Exactly. Nobody expected him to be able to accomplish anything. He was told by the French prime minister that he wasn't going to be able to accomplish anything. And sure enough, he didn't accomplish anything. So, exactly
I think he
did
accomplish something, because I think Rome is burning so bad in terms of his administration. I think it was just a junket. Like you said, nothing was accomplished, but at least he got out of Dodge for what, 4 days.
Yeah, he got out of Dodge, managed to use up an incredible amount of jet fuel and, put more carbon emissions into the atmosphere, just as he's arguing for climate change. So,
let's talk about the climate change. I thought that was amazing to me. Just shows you how out of touch his administration is. He had Pete Buttigieg on all these Sunday shows, how aghast he was that people are just so hesitant to embrace change. I mean, not a lot of people I know have $70,000 to buy an electric car and just trash the one that's perfectly functioning. I mean, that's a huge economic or financial swing, but this guy has no clue. The more he talks, I think the more his value goes down. It's directly disproportional. And I also think that it shows where the Biden administration's priorities are, who's really running the show. And I think the radicals, the crazies, have not left yet, if they will ever.
No, they clearly haven't. The radical left is in charge of this administration. Their focus is climate change. That's their big thing. And as you said, in a recent poll, 1% of Americans consider climate change an important issue. They're much more concerned with paying for gas, paying for groceries, meeting their bills. And we've talked about for years the fact that most Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And yet this administration expects them to suddenly come up with $60,000 to $70,000 to buy a new electric car, which, by the way, electric cars still do not have all that much range. And we don't have the charging infrastructure. It takes hours to recharge an electric car. So unless you're just traveling within a big city, electric cars are not going to do you a lot of good. You can't actually get anywhere yet. If Biden was so concerned about the environment and so concerned about climate change and wanted electric cars, he should have focused on building up the infrastructure so that electric cars were actually usable by the average person.
Okay, but that's a bigger issue because one of the big issues in his administration, well, there's 1,000 big issues, but one of them, because it could take maybe 50 shows, and I think, the bandwidth, this wouldn't be that big. One of the problems with his administration, among others, is that zero, not one, not three, come out of the private sector. They're all theoretical, radical nutcases. So they don't know. Like you just stated, a logical fact and strategic, consideration, but they're not from the real world. They've never done anything in the private sector. So they just throw out all these platitudes about electric vehicles and about this and about, but they don't understand at the ground level what needs to be done. Your comment?
No, there was a survey that just came out going over who was in the Biden administration. And of the hundreds of staffers that they had, only 60 of them had ever had a real job. Add into this the elected officials, who many of them have never had real jobs. And let's face it, if you're just looking at the folks on the left, the big professional experience is you can make one heck of a Manhattan.
Pretty much.
They don't understand how these things work. And I mean, this is not new to the Biden administration. We saw this in the Obama administration also. And Obama was hoist on his own petard over gas prices. They didn't get as high as with Biden. But the administration didn't understand that they were trying to get gas to be $7 a gallon. This was stated by Obama's energy secretary. But unlike Joe Biden, Obama didn't go out of his way to limit supply as much as Biden did. So when gas prices started going up, oil companies started drilling more because they could make more money, and that in turn brought the price of gas back down. Biden got rid of supply, constrained it by putting all these new regulations on the oil industry, and then complains that the oil industry is gouging us.
And ma and pa gas stations that, if you knew anything about anything, make a penny at best. They don't get money from gas overall. They get it from the crap they sell in the store, cigarettes,
the
sodas, and whatever.
Yeah, the guys who own the gas stations. And it is important to remember that these are owned by mom and pops. The gas stations themselves are not owned by the oil conglomerates.
I don't know if he really even knows that, to be honest with you.
He probably doesn't. But these guys make more money off of Coca-Cola and Slim Jims than they do gas.
Yes. Well, speaking of gas, we had Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, the only doctor I know that had spelling errors on her thesis, but that's another issue. Basically giving the eulogy, even though it's not even at midterm, of her husband's. He had so many good things he wanted to do. Your comment. I mean, it is pretty funny from the good doctor.
It really was amazing.
Friends like that, you don't need enemies.
She was talking about, she was trying to make excuses for him. And she was saying there were all of these great things that he wanted to do, and reality got in the way and he wasn't able to do it. And the entire speech was in past tense, which made it sound like the presidency was over.
Well,
and
it is.
And it also ignored the big fact that dealing with the situation on the ground is the job of the president. So essentially what she was doing was, he would have been a fantastic president if he didn't actually have to do his job.
Oh, yeah, no, I think it's hysterical. It's like being a CEO of a company and saying, I had these amazing plans to do this, that, and the other thing, but then there was a slowdown in the economy, and we had new competitors. What's that really called is what really happens in the real world, and it's what you have to deal with. Yeah, if anyone could be the mastermind of the century if everything just stopped and then you could just focus on one thing. Hello.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And quite frankly, I don't honestly think Joe Biden is capable of focusing on anything at this point. But there was no way he was prepared for the job, which you would think 50 years in politics, if there was anybody that should have been prepared for this job, it should have been him.
Yeah, you know something, I was never a big fan of his. He was never a Mensa candidate. I was living in Philadelphia, which is pretty close to Delaware, when he did his 1988 run, and not the brightest bulb, always a complete abject liar, UPenn, and plagiarizing. But I would have to say he is not the same man. Forget about 88. I'm talking not the same man as 2010. I mean, you could have a brain surgeon and they have dementia. They have dementia. There's nothing you can do about it. And he has dementia. He's out in left field, not center field, left field. And he's the president of the United States. That's the way he walks. Even in Israel, he didn't get a lot of press, but he did the handshake to air.
Yep.
And then they put him off to the seat. I mean, you don't think our adversaries are just, I mean, they're laughing. It's hysterical.
Why do you think China is passing us in hypersonic technology weapons? Why Russia was emboldened to essentially attempt to annex the Ukraine? If we had had a strong president, this would not be happening.
And that's the real question, Dr. Lobkin. And no one talks about that, especially with Ukraine. Trump, yes, we already talked about asshole of the year in terms of personality. We all get it. But I doubt Putin would have invaded Ukraine. I seriously doubt it. But they know they had, Weekend at Bernie's at the helm, and Kamala, and his whole bench is so weak that it was a no-brainer almost.
No, yeah, and I mean, people go, well,
and Taiwan's coming next.
Yeah, defenders of Biden keep going, well, you can't know that, you're just guessing. No, we're not just guessing, because during the George W. administration, Russia took over in Georgia. They moved in. During the Obama administration, they invaded part of Ukraine. During the Biden administration, all-out war with Ukraine. During the Trump administration, they stayed within their borders. So, yeah, it's not, oh, you can't know that. History tells us this.
Without a doubt. So, other noteworthy politicians, we have Nancy Pelosi, who, by the way, is going to visit Taiwan, and the Chinese said that if she does, they're going to respond, whatever that means. But that's another issue. We have her husband, the drunk, two-time recipient of a DUI, which the dash cam has never come out. If it was a Republican, couldn't come out fast enough. We'll see if he's actually going to be charged. But he's just happened to invest in some tech companies that the Congress is now voting on, correct? That's a coincidence, isn't it, Dr. Lobkin?
Of course it is. Yes, he just bought. I'm forgetting the number. The number's $1 million, but I can't remember if it was 1 million shares or $1 million worth. But of NVIDIA, which is a semiconductor company, very successful. These guys put graphics chips in most computers. They're one of the leaders in the semiconductor industry. And his investment in it comes only about 2 weeks before Congress attempted to give the semiconductor industry a whole bunch of subsidies.
Oh, it's by coincidence only.
Of
and
course.
It's a coincidence that they came into power, little Nancy, okay, fancy Nancy, came in, probably worth a couple million, possibly from, old money. Now they're worth over $100 million. Isn't that what we always talk about on Carnivore Bites? And that is, good socialists is always do as I say, not as I do, correct? I mean, she's, all about the children, all about the little people, but yet she's doing things that most little people would be arrested for.
Yes, in fact,
Insider trading, it's called.
Yes, Pelosi has shown her colors on this because this is actually the one issue that the folks on the radical left and the folks on the center and conservative all agree on, that Congress people should not, and their spouses, and immediate family should not be allowed to invest in the stock market. And they have created bills to this, and Nancy Pelosi has blocked every bill from coming up for a vote.
Well, the other
So,
thing is, I want your comment on arrogance as well. Paulie P just got a DUI. He was probably with some bimbo. That's why the dash cam never is going to come out, probably. But you think you'd want to lay low, just keep it in your pants for this go around. You're already worth. You're 80 something years old. You're worth over $100 billion. You think you want to lay low, but no, arrogance trumps everything, doesn't it?
it always does. This is not a surprise. I mean, you would think that after going after high class hookers and putting these people in jail, Elliot Spitzer would have been smart enough not to hire one of these hookers. You would think that Anthony Weiner would be smart enough not to send out photos of his wiener. But no, these people are all incredibly arrogant. They think they're smarter than everybody. The fact of the matter is, most of these folks aren't even as smart as the average person on the street.
Not at all.
But they think they can't be caught. They think, and this goes across party lines.
Definitely.
This is just the power elite. It goes to their head, and they believe nothing can stop them. The perfect example, Bill de Blasio drove New York City into the ground, then thought he's going to run for president. Got smacked down by that. They finally got him out of office, and he announced, well, I'm going to run for Congress. And only yesterday did he finally realize that he didn't have a chance in hell and pulled out of the race.
And you know something? I'm going to miss him because he's a gift. He was the gift that keeps on giving. That is incompetency on steroids. Amazing. Yes, he did run New York into the ground. I don't know if it'll ever recover. Do you think it'll recover?
I think it will eventually, but it's going to take time. I mean, where the city is actually at a very similar place as it was in the 1970s, which high crime, inflation was out of control, sort of like the rest of the country. And New York did come back. But, and I will point out, it took Ed Koch did his best and he got it, downfield to score, but it took Rudy Giuliani to cross that goal line.
100% correct. Switching topics a bit, we have the wokeism that's just pervasive everywhere. In fact, on an aside, there was a survey that a substantial percentage of young parents are not going to assign gender and let the child decide eventually, which is something we all should scratch our heads about. And how are these people parents? But that's another issue. But we have the wokeism of Leah Thomas at UPenn, the male swimmer that blasted all the records. Surprise, surprise. And he's been nominated for Female NCAA Athlete of the Year. Amazing. You can't make that up, can you?
He was nominated by the folks at UPenn. Now, let's not forget, this is the same sports department that kept a sexual assault case going for years, covering it up. So I don't know how much, credit you want to give these people. I want to give a shout out to Martina Navratilova. She came out blasting UPenn about this because Leah Thomas is not a woman, and he should not be eligible for a female award. And now you're starting to see people finally speak up, and things are finally going to move a little more to center. You're seeing it with people speaking up about this. You're seeing this. We talked about this on our sister podcast, Raw Naked Truth. There is now a growing number of transgender teens who are now in their late teens, early 20s, who are coming out saying they regret switching. They should never have been allowed to make the decision, and they felt pressure to make this decision. And they are coming out and saying, no, kids should not be allowed to take puberty blockers. They should not be allowed to transition. If an older person wants to transition, fine. They've got the experience. They've got their brain is fully developed. They can make an informed decision. The kids can't. And now you're seeing a backlash against that.
Well, hopefully the backlash will grow, because I find it just the most atrocious form of child abuse I've ever heard of. I mean, this is irrevocable. I mean, you're having kids 12 years old, puberty blockers and so on and so forth. I mean, again, like you said, their brains are not fully formed. They're not adult brains. And, when you look at some of the adults that are making these decisions, I'm not sure they have adult brains either, but that's another discussion point.
Something that has to be taken into account. We're all familiar with the term of a sociopath. Well, sociopath is a specific psychiatric condition, and it cannot be diagnosed until somebody is an adult, because the natural brain system of a teenager and the system of a sociopath are almost identical. And normal teenagers grow out of this, and as they become adults, they become who they're going to be. We've known this for decades. So allowing a child who we already say not capable of making the decision to drink, not capable of making the decision to smoke, not capable of making the decision to vote, but we're allowing them to make the decision to have life-altering surgery.
Yeah, like, again, if it was a movie back in 1980, you would walk out and saying, this is just ridiculous. But that's the world we live in right now, thanks to wokeism and the progressive left, and I use the term progressive with a lot of misgivings. We also have. Go ahead.
We are starting to see again. I talked about the backlash within the transgender community. We're starting to see backlash in the corporate community against these leftist policies, and in fact, two companies that have been known for supporting woke policies, Starbucks and Chipotle, have started to pull back. Starbucks is actually closing locations in high crime areas where liberal city councils have defunded the police, including 16 in their home city of Seattle, because it's too dangerous to keep them open. Chipotle was just faced with workers wanting to unionize. And rather than dealing with the unions, they decided to close those locations. So you're starting to see a lot of backlash against the left's policies.
Yeah, I think also with the whole corporate woke, I think it was just a brief period of time. At least I hope that is, because I think the positives outweighed the negatives in terms of, companies like Disney and others losing sight of what the true objective of a corporation is, and that is to increase stockholder equity, not worry about transgender rights. That's for the private sector. Speaking of the private sector, we have the ongoing Twitter wars, Dr. Lopkin, between Elon Musk and Twitter.
Yeah, right now it's just a war of words, but a judge has scheduled the trial to take place this October. So between now and then, they'll be doing discovery. This is actually what Elon Musk has been trying to get to, because under discovery, He believes he can find out the true number of fake accounts on Twitter. And as we've said in the past, Twitter is between a rock and a hard place, because either they've got to reveal the number of fake accounts, and they were much larger than they actually reported, which will get them in trouble with the SEC, or they'll be able to prove that Elon Musk was wrong. The fake accounts are under 5%, at which point Elon Musk will go, well, okay, you've actually proved it. I will buy the company.
I think eventually he will anyway. I think he's a master negotiator, and I think even it's almost more about his ego, whatever his reach, his beliefs. So I don't think it was ever that much of a business decision.
I don't actually think this whole thing is about his ego. I think it's a negotiating ploy. I think he's just trying to lower the asking price.
Oh no, I think his intent to buy Twitter was more about something he wanted versus an actual. There's a lot more money to be made in other avenues than Twitter that really has the revenue model is nothing to
But you have to remember you have to remember that that's how Elon Musk has done everything. He started PayPal. He founded PayPal because he wanted an easy way to buy goods over the internet. He started SpaceX because he wants to walk on the moon. He started Tesla because he wanted an electric car. He thought it would be cool. This has always been how Elon Musk has done it, but he's always managed to take the company he's created and make a fortune at it. And I'm sure he's going to find a way to do that with Twitter as well.
I would agree with that. Over the weekend, we had, which I thought, I talk about ego. I think AOC and others in the squad, I think Omar was in on it, but certainly AOC. I think she's always been full of something. Now she's full of herself. She had she protested in front of the Supreme Court, was, I believe, escorted out, not really arrested, but pretended she was handcuffed when she wasn't, and then gave the power sign indicative of the 1968 Olympics during the height of the Black Power movement. You just get to a point, it starts to be nauseating.
It really is. And, AOC and Ilhan Omar were at this protest. They were escorted out. They were not arrested. But yes, when they were walking out, they put their hands behind their back, pretending to be handcuffed, which everybody saw was absolutely ridiculous. But this actually goes to show how desperate the Democrats are becoming. Because one, it's all about the theater, but two, they're not even pretending to tell the truth anymore. And it's beyond just the ones on the radical left. Because right now, Senator Richard Blumenthal is airing campaign commercials. He's up for re-election. And he's talking about how important it is that he be reelected, because if the Republicans take control of Congress, they will abolish abortion nationwide. Okay, Richard Blumenthal was Attorney General. He is a lawyer. He should know better, because according to the Dobbs decision that the Supreme Court handed down, the decision of whether or not to regulate abortions belongs to the states. That doesn't just mean that the federal government can't say, oh, everybody can have an abortion when the states disagree. It also means that Congress, if it was taken over by the far right, can't say that everybody can't have an abortion. It goes both ways.
So what you're saying is that Dick Blumenthal lies? Are you
again and
how
again?
Can you say that?
I mean, we've talked about him over and over. This is a man who lied about his military. Lied about his military career. Lied about having evidence against Donald Trump. He lies over and over again. I mean, he is the stereotypical politician. How do you know when Richard Blumenthal lies? his lips move.
Yes, but he never
But
really talks anything about serious issues, especially being a Jewish American. Never talks about the growth of anti-Semitism, the expansion, the explosion of anti-Semitism in his party and in places like California. But he'll talk about some bullshit bill in front of the MSNBC camera, which he never met a camera he didn't fall in love with, because he's in love with himself, essentially.
exactly. But this is how desperate the Democrats are getting, bringing it back to AOC and Omar, is that they're putting all of their eggs in the abortion basket. They're like, "Oh, this is the only thing that's going to save us." And while abortion is more important according to the polls than climate change is, it's still way below inflation and the cost of gas and the cost of living. So they don't want to deal with the situations that are actually affecting all of America. They're
because
just
it's not
trying.
affecting them at their little sushi bars and little parties in Washington. In fact, AOC claims that she's a victim. She's actually said she's impoverished, which when you look at the median, not the average, the median income of in the United States is something like $36,000 a year. But she's impoverished. I mean, it's just despicable. These people are completely out of touch, and they're so out of touch they don't understand that another issue that's coming their way is the possible housing bubble. Housing, the housing market's the worst it's ever been since 2000. There's a leading economists that say that if you buy a house within the next 6 months, a year from now, you'll be in the negative in terms of your asset value. So if a housing bubble does come to fruition, that's just one more nail in the Democrats' coffin. And yet the other thing is, just to maintain a house, like electric bills, are approaching several $100s a month. A month.
And in some cases, a lot more than that.
Yeah, $500 a month. And so I'm sure many Americans have a concern about abortion, and I can understand why. But I think economic issues, it's the economy's stupid. And I also am a little surprised, and I'd like your comment on this, Dr. Lopkin, is that we haven't had the uprising in the streets. I don't think it's I think when more people understand what really happened than the Democrats want to understand. Does that make any sense?
Yeah,
because there's not the outrage in the streets that I thought was going to happen. I think most people are not happy with the decision, but understand it's not the end of abortion.
Yeah, I think people do understand that, but I think in a lot of cases, it's just a matter of, okay, I've got so much bandwidth. What do I focus on? And, whether or not to have an abortion, let's face it, this is not a decision most people deal with on a day-to-day basis. But when you go to buy milk and it's, $5 a gallon, and you go to fill up your car and it's $100 to fill up your car just so you can get to work, this is what takes people's attention. So while the radical left has been calling for violence and there have been some protests, you're not seeing that outrage because, quite frankly, overall, the outrage is being lashed out when you go shopping and it's like, oh my God, how am I going to afford this? That is what the Biden administration and the Democrats don't seem to understand. Actually, I'm gonna rephrase that. The Biden administration does not understand this. From comments I have heard from, I would estimate, about half of the Democratic Party, the Democrats do understand it, but they don't want to talk about it because they're aware that their policies are the ones that have gotten us into this, and they don't have a defense.
100%. Well, speaking of defense, a defender, I believe, of this country, unwittingly or not, is Manchin. He didn't go along with the more recent boondoggle, which was a climate change extravaganza. He single-handedly, I don't know, just for political expediency, out of patriot, who cares? But without Joe Manchin, we would be in a lot more world of hurt.
Yeah, Joe Manchin has
Man of the year.
He has absolutely kept us from abject destruction. Government spending increases inflation. We know this. Every economist knows this.
The president doesn't know it, though.
Well, the president doesn't know it, and apparently the left wing of the Democratic Party doesn't know this. But this is a known factor. Now, imagine we are facing record inflation. How much worse would it have been with an extra $1 trillion in spending?
And by the way, we haven't seen the full extent of the spending because most of the states haven't put that money into circulation. I'm talking about things that have already been approved.
Right.
So it hasn't had its full effect yet.
No, we haven't seen the effect of spending. The majority of money allocated under the American Rescue Plan, which was passed in January 2021, still has not been allocated. Most of the money from the bipartisan infrastructure bill still has not been allocated and spent. So they don't even want to wait for that money to get into the pipeline. The Democrats want to pour in so much more. That is going to absolutely devastate the economy. It's going to shoot inflation higher. And Manchin has been good, but I'm going to pull back a little bit because it's not just Manchin. And this is, first of all, this is something that drives me nuts. I keep hearing Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar complain about this, how one man is keeping us from doing what we want to do. No, it's not one man. It's 51 men and women who are standing against this, because the reason that Manchin is the linchpin is because they can't get a single Republican senator to help them. More than that, Manchin was negotiating with them over this climate change bill. The reason he backed away and said, no, this is not the time, is because his constituents in West Virginia stood up and told him, no, you have to stop this now.
Yeah, of course. West Virginia is highly centered on coal production, what's left of it, and that would obviously be political suicide for him. We also are looking at, speaking of the political landscape, Karl Rove, who I think has some good insights. I think something I'd like you to comment on, Dr. Lopkin, is that he says that the environment has never, ever been better for Republicans as you go into the midterms. He goes, but don't get too excited because at the grassroots level, the tactical level, it's still going to be tough, especially in the Senate, which kind of suggested, yes, overall, people are pissed off about the Democratic agenda. But when you have candidates, like Herschel Walker, Oz, it's going to be a little harder than many people think.
It's possible. There's an old saying, all politics is local.
Mm-hmm.
It's all going to come down to the district. I think Rove's comment that it might be difficult is a little premature because we still have a whole bunch of Republican primaries to go through. So we don't even know who all the candidates are going to be yet.
There's also, and I think it's becoming increasingly likely that we're headed towards a official recession. I think that's not going to help things for the Democrats either.
No,
and there'll be more layoffs
because
I know people in corporate America, their companies are already they've already had a layoff and they're ginning up for another one.
Apple just announced a hiring freeze. A lot of companies have already announced hiring freezes.
And that's the first step.
Yes, that before you lay people off, you stop hiring new ones. But companies are all preparing for a recession. It's expected we're going to see a recession. We will see what happens at the end of this month. We have the last week this month. Not only do we have the second quarter GDP numbers coming out, we've also got the Fed meeting where they're going to raise interest rates. Expectations now are that they'll raise it 75 basis points. But as recently as a week and a half ago, people were talking about that they might have to do a full basis point, which is a full percentage, which has been unheard of. So, yeah, a recession is going to severely hurt the Democrats. The other thing that people don't seem to realize is right now in the generic ballot, the Republicans have a 3-point advantage. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot. In the past, historically, when the underdog party, that's the party that's not in charge, has a lead of 2 to 3 points in the generic ballot, it has been a blowout. So all of the winds are blowing in favor of the Republicans, but let's never dismiss the possibility of them shooting themselves in the foot.
I would agree, and I think as we move on to another subject, I believe that if the last week of this month we are officially in a recession, I think that has huge. Even though if we are official or not official, if you're the average household, it really doesn't make a difference, right? Unless you're an economist. But I think that just the news media having to report that is going to have a huge effect on the midterms. Because now
absolutely.
It's official. Even though it doesn't make any difference in the average person, but once you have that stamp, we are officially in a recession. Now Biden is a president who is now under his watch, we have a recession. Not good.
Right. And remember, we've already gotten inflation numbers came out last week after we did last week's episode of Carnivore Radio, and they were higher than expected. The CPI came in over 9. The PPI came in over 11. Even if these numbers had gone down from 8 to 7 or from 10 to 9, they're still astronomically high. The fact that they're still going up can be terrifying for the average American who literally can be looking at the supermarket and going, well, can I afford to buy this? I can feed my family, or I can buy the medication I need, or
those
I
are the
can pay
real
my
world
rent.
Scenario, yes. Absolutely, 100%. And we're, again, referring back to this glorious administration. By the way, who said this? Newt Gingrich believes it's the worst administration since Buchanan. And Buchanan, I believe, was the president that was before Abraham Lincoln and basically essentially caused the Civil War. But that's another issue. But speaking of the worst president possibly, at least in my lifetime, we have the explosion at the border that's now affecting places like New York City, Washington, D.C., and the homeless situation, isn't it?
Yes, the mayor of Washington, D.C. has come out complaining that Governor Abbott of Texas has been busing immigrants. But yeah, she claims they're being tricked. There has been no trick because this has all been caught on video. It's literally people going, this bus is going to Washington, D.C. Do you want to go? And they're, oh, yes, thank you. It's been on video. They get off. They're hugging the bus drivers for getting them to D.C. But these people have nowhere to go, so they're going into homeless shelters. And Washington, D.C.'s homeless shelters are now overflowing. They can't handle the overflow. Just this morning, Eric Adams was yelling, the same thing is happening in New York City. And he was blaming Governor Abbott, except for the fact that Governor Abbott hasn't sent any buses to New York City. Who's sent migrants to New York City, though?
Biden.
The Biden administration has been flying them into Westchester.
And by the way, Eric Adams is a huge disappointment. He spent less time in discos and trying to hang around hotties than he would, actually running the city. We might be in a better position. But that's another issue.
I had much higher hopes for him, and he's been nothing but a disappointment.
A joke. And speaking of a joke, let's end on this. A new tourist attraction, that's a little bit overreaching, but a point of interest in Delaware is something called Brandon Falls, isn't it? And people actually go there to recreate, like recreating the Super Bowl moment or something at your favorite stadium. But this isn't quite it, is it, Dr. Lopkins?
No, this is absolutely hysterical. On Google Maps, the spot where President Biden fell off his bike has been christened Brandon Falls, and it's listed as a historical space.
You can't make that up.
So
well,
thank you, whoever programmed that into Google Maps.
It's fantastic. Well, Dr. Lopkin, great show. I guess next week we'll not have the verdict on recession, no recession, but maybe we'll have some whisperings to that effect.
No, we will not have the official numbers. They're supposed to come out Thursday. We will, however, be talking about it on the Friday next week edition of Raw Naked Truth with Carnivore Radio alum Chris Calandra. So
that'll be a great show. Yes,
we will have the Fed notes for you. We will have the whether or not we're in a recession, what it all means, next Friday on Raw Naked Truth. And of course, you can catch every episode of Carnivore Radio and the Raw Naked Truth at xvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, and wherever you find podcasts. And of course, if you want to weigh in on the news items that we discuss on either podcast, go to xvadio.com/connect and let us know what you're thinking.
Thank you, Dr. Lopkin. I'll see you next week.
We'll see you then.